For over a week now, the prison escaper had eluded detection, despite a massive police hunt of South Canterbury that included roadblocks and bloodhounds. All they'd found so far were his prison-allocated underpants and boots. One of those out scouring the countryside that day was Constable Martin. In a field next to him on a road were the farm workers undertaking thrashing, wondering what all that fuss was all about. One of the inquisitive workers approached the policeman to see what was going on down their normally quiet road. Martin explained the situation and to keep a lookout for the escapee. To his surprise and chagrin, the labourer told him point blank. Far from turning him in, he'd happily assist him, then went back to work. And there is no better way to introduce the mercurial Jonathan Roberts, the very man the New Zealand police were hunting that day in 1888, and he was the worker in the field. Jonathan Guy Roberts was born in England in 1861 and shifted to New Zealand as a toddler, living his early years in Canterbury. His parents were what you would term of means. In his youth, Roberts was an accomplished cross-country runner and swimmer, two recreational activities that would serve him well in the future. Indeed, his father owned a sizable farm. After leaving school, the popular Roberts joined the Bank of New Zealand, aged 17, moving around branches from Akaroa to Wellington. Given his pedigree, why he went off the tracks is anyone's guess. After up and leaving the BNZ in 1886 and shifting south, where he fell into desperate times, he decided to put his banking experience to work, forging a cheque in Christchurch, for which, aged 25, he received a 2-year jail term including hard labour. Almost immediately after his release, he inexplicably stole one of the publican's coach horses outside Hood's Hotel in Mount Somers, mid-Canterbury. The modern-day pub is on Hood's Road, so I gather it was the same spot in 1888. And this is what the old one looked like. He next trotted off to Timaru, where he sold the horse at auction and decided to celebrate by getting drunk. The police found him at the Rotherham pub, sleeping off a hangover. He got 5 years this time, 3 for the horse and 2 for the saddle and gear. An extremely harsh sentence even for those days, given the horse and gear were barely worth £20. After sentencing, Roberts was placed in remand in Timaru prison, awaiting transfer to Littleton, specifically Ripapa, an island come fort set in the Littleton harbour. Get a mental image of a very small Alcatraz. Anyway, on the very same day, the Timaru jail and police cells were playing guest to the New Zealand Inspector of Prisons. Roberts did a runner, in a literal meaning of the term runner. On an exercise break, he scarpered out the gates and outran both guards and the police. In the initial escape, he came across a milkman on his round and stole his horse, hightailing it into the countryside of South Canterbury, where he put his knowledge of the area and contacts to good use. Cue the original story I told you at the beginning. He was finally located a month later in Leaston, cutting gorse for cash, and was deterred from bolting away this time when the police fired warning shots in his direction. For his escape, he got an extra year lumped onto his sentence, and on the 7th of June he ended up on Ripapa Island with the prospect of filling his time out doing, once again, hard labour. He had other plans. Less than a day after arriving on the island, which also doubled as a naval battery, he escaped during a dinner break. His breakout was assisted by other prisoners who had alerted him to a hole in the mesh which led down to a spot on the shoreline that was partly obscured from the soul guard doing the rounds during mealtimes. From this spot, Roberts swam to the mainland and freedom. His escape was only discovered at roll call an hour later, by which time Roberts was well gone. Now is a good time as any to point out that stories of this nature and the passing of time often mean a divergence of fact to fiction. Much of the narrative from here on in comes from Roberts' own hand and is sure to be embellished. What is clear was that Roberts was hiding right under the police's noses, living it rough. He had built himself a small hut at Kaituna, and he also had a sizable amount of assistants surviving, ranging from his parents, old workmates at the Akaroa B&Z, through to the local Maori population. As time went on, the reward for his recapture climbed from £25 to £300, the equivalent of 2 years' wages for a lot of people. The public sentiment was largely on Roberts' side. Most people believed they too would have escaped if they were imprisoned for that length of time for stealing a knackered old horse. The female population also developed a fondness for Mr. Roberts, swooned over the dashing escapee. The public also kicked back at the police's attempts to label him a dangerous desperado, when it was revealed on his previous escape he had spent the entire time harmlessly labouring on farms. 3 weeks after his swim to freedom, a boot containing a foot washed up on the Newbighton beach, leading to speculation he had drowned in his escape. The remains were later ascertained to be those of a local fisherman. Authorities also had to face questions as to how a prisoner could escape an island-based prison with relative ease on his first day. The chief jailer on that day of the escape bore the brunt of those repercussions. Reduced in rank, he was reassigned to Hokitika. In the months that followed, sightings did come in. He was spotted in Timaru, on a ferry to Wellington, sailing to Peru, and even downtown Melbourne. Time would show the South American report was closest to the money. The massive South Island police backblock search would soon come up with some success, though. Not with the intended target, though. Another escapee, one Alfred Rouse, who was fleeing paying child support, was located in a remote hideout in the backblocks of South Canterbury. In his remote hut at Kaituna, Roberts enjoyed reading all the reports. His crude hut and hiding place wouldn't be discovered till 1919, when the area was developed as a nature reserve. He even got to monitor the results of a steeplechaser that was renamed Jonathan Roberts. Massaged his ego with the lyrics of a ballad written in his honour. So what was his fate? In February the following year, Roberts sailed out of the very same harbour he was swimming in 7 months earlier. On board the vessel Waimate, bound for England. At the very time he was sailing to freedom overseas, 2 things were happening back home. Newspapers all over the country were announcing his capture in New South Wales after being identified in a dance hall. And those reports turned out to be a case of mistaken identity coupled with miscommunications between the respective policing forces. And also, the other thing that was happening is criminality appears to have run right through his family. One of his brothers, Joseph, got caught for larceny in Hawke's Bay and was jailed for 3 years. And around the time, another brother, James, got the same sentence for false pretences. The poor Roberts parents must have been wondering what they'd done, considering their upbringing. Meanwhile, the only Roberts lad not behind bars in New Zealand was sailing off to England. There, this story now goes 2 ways. 2.5 if you really want to be picky. One states he popped up in Chile, the port city of Valparaiso, and calling himself Jonathan Guy O'Roberts, which must be, I'm presuming, a play on the Irishman that led the Chilean independence movement earlier in the century, Bernardo O'Higgins. And there he was said to be in the Chilean army that was battling the Chilean navy in a messy civil war, which O'Roberts was on the side of the army, in fact gaining the rank of general after a tale of his military prowess back home, despite the fact he had no military background whatsoever. and he turned out to be on the losing side. And then from there he went to Virginia and became a farmer, brazenly now calling himself Jonathan Guy Roberts, and dying there in Virginia in 1924. The second report states he went from the UK to New York, where he settled down and got married almost immediately after arrival. That's certainly what happened to a person with virtually the same name, John Guy Roberts. John Roberts, with the same birth year, became a respectable New Jersey accountant with 7 children before moving to California, where he died of TB in 1910. There he was buried in illustrious company at the Forest Lawn Cemetery. The sightings of Roberts also occurred in New Zealand for decades to come. And the two aforementioned men here and their lives attribute to the Roberts post-New Zealand, i.e. the general, come farmer, and the accountant, shared roughly the same names and roughly the same birth dates, at a time when cross-border records weren't as rigorous as they are today. The one and only photo we have of him is the one the New Zealand police took. That is where we need to leave this fascinating story, or technically stories. What an adventurous life Jonathan Roberts led. All of them. Little wonder he was dubbed New Zealand's Dick Turpin. And he's not the only Kiwi to end up in Chilean history books either. There's also the infamous Alexander Indian killer Cameron. Nor was Roberts the first and only person to escape a New Zealand prison on more than one occasion. This bloke on your screen is Riccardo Sand, and he also falls into this category as well. You'll get a laugh out of this story, trust me. As chance would have it, I happen to have done videos on those two blokes, and the link for that is below. Just a gentle reminder, subscriptions and likes are what keeps this channel going and growing. And doing either means this whitebait I have kept hostage in a bucket will live. Thanks for your time today, and I hope to see you next time. Bye for now.